Is that all you have to say for yourself?
I was only trying to help, Mother.
Help? You only cause trouble.
The first time King Don saw me, I was on my knees. His boot stopped less than a foot from my face. I could smell the leather, the road dust, and beneath it, something ancient and electric that made my wolf go completely, terrifyingly still. He looked down. I felt his gaze like a stone dropped into water. And then he looked away, because I was wearing a servant's dress, and a servant is not something an alpha king needs to see. My name is Pam. My father is Frederick, a respected elder of this pack. I grew up in that house. I learned to walk in that hallway. My mother is buried in the garden at the back. After she died, my father brought home Lady Margaret, and within a year I had a stepmother, a stepsister named Crystal, and a scrubbing brush. I stopped being a daughter. I became a detail no one mentioned. I swept their floors for years to get here. I carried their wood. I washed their feet. They thought sending me to the palace as Crystal's maid was a punishment. They forgot something important. I am my mother's daughter, and she did not raise me to stay on my knees. I am inside the palace now. I know every stone of it, and the king who walked past me without a second glance is about to find out whose daughter he stepped over. Lady Margaret's scent had soaked into the walls of my father's house so thoroughly that some mornings I could not find my mother's smell anywhere anymore. I had started keeping a piece of her old shawl in my apron pocket, just a strip of it, faded blue wool, worn thin at the edges from years of her hands moving over it when she was thinking. I touched it when I passed the room that used to be hers and was now Margaret's dressing room. It was the only place in the house that the past still had a scent. I was born in this house. I learned to walk in this hallway, tracing the same stones beneath my feet that I now scrubbed on my knees every Thursday morning. My mother used to say that a house remembers everyone who has ever loved inside it. I believed her then. I was less certain now. This house had forgotten me so thoroughly that some days I wondered if I was haunting it rather than living in it. I woke before dawn. I always woke before dawn. The kitchen first, the fire, the water, the morning meal that would be ready when Lady Margaret descended at the hour she considered appropriate for a woman of her standing. Then the front hall. Then whatever Margaret had decided needed doing, delivered in that particular tone she reserved for me, clipped, impersonal, the voice you used for equipment that occasionally needed instruction. She never called me Pam when my father wasn't in the room. She never called me anything. My father moved through the house like a man walking underwater. There was a time, before Margaret, before the grief carved him hollow, when he used to carry me on his shoulders through the winter market so I could see above the crowd. He used to say, "There's my girl," like those 3 words were a complete sentence, like they contained everything he needed to say about how he felt about having me in the world. I had not heard those words in 4 years. Now he moved through rooms without landing in them. His eyes had a quality I had spent years trying to name, not unkind, not cruel, simply elsewhere. He had put himself somewhere I could not reach him, and I had begun to understand, with the particular clarity that comes from watching something long enough, that he had done it deliberately. Because the alternative to going elsewhere was staying here, and staying here meant seeing what was happening to his daughter in his own home, and that was a thing Frederick, respected elder, beloved pack member, man of standing and honor, could not bring himself to do. I had stopped waiting for him to find his way back, not because I had stopped loving him, but because I had finally allowed myself to understand that some men choose their peace over their children, and no amount of waiting changes that. There were things I had learned in this house that Margaret did not know I had learned. The hinges on her side of the corridor I had left deliberately unoiled for 2 years, the small resistance of a girl who had very little available to her. I knew which floorboards sang under pressure and which stayed silent, and I had memorized the map of them so completely I could move through the house in absolute darkness without making a sound. I knew the hour Margaret took her evening tonic, which made her sleep deeply enough that certain movements through the house went unregistered. I knew that Crystal's wolf was dominant but undisciplined, all instinct, no patience, which made her predictable in ways she would never recognize in herself because no one had ever loved her enough to tell her the truth about her own patterns. I had been cataloging this house and everyone in it since I was 12 years old, not because I had a plan, simply because my wolf told me, very early and very clearly, that knowing my environment was the only advantage I had. I did not intend to waste it. It was a Tuesday when the announcement came. I was in the front hall, scrubbing, always scrubbing, when Margaret swept in from the yard with the particular energy she carried when something had happened that she had been engineering for a long time. "The king is coming," she said. Not to me, to the room, to the walls, to whatever version of her future she had been constructing in private. King Don will pay his respects to Elder Frederick within the fortnight. She turned toward the stairs. She paused. She looked back at me on the floor. Something moved through her expression, not malice exactly, but the cool, focused attention of a woman who had just confirmed the last variable in an equation she had been solving for a very long time. She held my gaze for 3 seconds. Then she smiled, small, private, and went upstairs without another word. I kept scrubbing. I was still scrubbing 20 minutes later when Crystal came through the hall on her way to the yard, dressed for leisure, her hair loose, her expression carrying the warm, distracted glow of a girl who had just been told that the life she always expected was finally arriving on schedule. She stopped when she reached me. I felt her stop. I did not look up. "You missed a spot," she said. Her voice was pleasant, almost conversational, the voice of someone commenting on the weather. I looked at the section of floor she was indicating. I had not missed a spot. The stone was clean. I had scrubbed this particular stone 4 times already this morning. I said nothing. I moved the brush to the clean stone and scrubbed it again. Crystal watched me for a moment. Then she shifted her weight, just slightly, just enough, and the toe of her soft leather boot came down directly on the back of my hand. Not hard enough to be undeniable, exactly hard enough to be deliberate. The pressure held for 3 full seconds while she gazed at some middle distance above my head, her expression unchanged, her posture entirely relaxed, as if her foot had simply come to rest there the way feet occasionally do, and she had not yet found cause to move it. 3 seconds. She stepped off. She walked on. She did not look back. I stayed very still on my knees and looked at the red mark across my knuckles, and I made myself feel the full size of what had just happened, not to make it smaller, not to file it away before it had fully arrived, but to let it land completely and without mercy, so that I would remember exactly this when the time came to remember. I was not a guest in this house. I was not a family member fallen on difficult times. I was not a girl whose situation might improve if she kept her head down and her mouth shut long enough. I was something they practiced cruelty on, and no one was coming to stop them. I will, I thought. For the first time, I thought it not as a wish or a comfort, but as a cold, simple fact. I will. That evening, I caught something I had not caught before. Margaret was standing in the doorway of the sitting room, speaking to my father about the king's visit, the arrangements, the guest protocol, the impression they would need to make, standard elder household preparation. I was moving through the corridor behind her with a stack of pressed linens, invisible as always, and I heard her voice shift into a register I had not encountered in 4 years of living under her roof. Underneath the performance, underneath the planning and the management and the perfect orchestration of her words, fear. Not of the king. I understood that immediately. The timber was wrong for deference or anxiety about rank. This was something else, something specific, something she was keeping very close to the center of herself and speaking around rather than about. I moved past the doorway without slowing. I did not look in. I let my wolf senses reach back quietly the way water reaches into cracks in stone. She was afraid of something that the king's arrival made possible, and whatever it was, whatever she had spent 4 years systematically dismantling with gray dresses and cedar bark and a boot placed with surgical precision on the back of a kneeling girl's hand, it lived in me. I touched the strip of shawl in my pocket. I kept walking. Lady Margaret was already moving before the sun fully cleared the tree line. I heard her from my room above the kitchen, the sharp click of her heels on the stone floor, the rapid-fire commands she fired at the household wolves like arrows. Press the silver gown again, not like that, again. If a single crease shows when the king arrives, I will know whose hands were responsible. I lay still for exactly 3 seconds. Then I got up, because in this house, stillness costs you. By the time I reached the main hall, Crystal was already seated at the dressing table, wrapped in a robe the color of fresh cream, while 2 of Margaret's ladies worked around her like she was a shrine being prepared for worship. Margaret herself stood behind Crystal with a silver-handled brush, drawing it through my stepsister's hair in long, deliberate strokes. Slow, patient, loving. I stood in the doorway and watched my stepmother tend to her daughter the way my mother used to tend to me. The same angle of the wrist, the same downward pressure at the crown, the same slight tilt of the head to check the fall of the hair. My mother had brushed my hair every morning until the week she died. I filed it. I did not react. I had learned a long time ago that reacting was a luxury I could not afford in this house. Margaret's eyes found mine in the mirror. She did not stop brushing. "The gray dress," she said, "on your bed. And the floor wash today uses the cedar bark blend. The wolfsbane, too. Every room he might enter." My hands went still at my sides. Cedar bark, wolfsbane, the specific combination that collapses a wolf's ability to track scent, blurs pheromones, muddies bloodlines, makes the air read neutral to any wolf breathing it. She smiled at Crystal's reflection. She thought she was burying me. She did not know I had been burying myself in those same herbs since I was 12 years old, the moment my shadow-born instinct first whispered that something in my natural scent made her wolf go rigid and watchful in a way that always, always ended in a worse week for me. The herbs were her weapon, They had been my armor for 6 years. She was not hiding me from the king. She was hiding herself from what would happen if he smelled me before I was ready. I said nothing. I took the cloth. I went to my knees on the cold stone floor and began to scrub. I was still scrubbing when Crystal passed me on her way to the entrance door, trailing perfume and silk, her silver earrings catching the morning light like small flames. She paused. I felt her shadow fall across me. I did not look up, but I heard her stop breathing for a moment, just one moment, just long enough, and I heard the exact second she made the choice not to feel it. The way a door doesn't slam, but simply closes, latch catching with a soft, final click. She had practiced this not seeing, the not feeling. She had stood in this hall watching Margaret assign me my instructions for 3 years, and she had built a wall around it so smooth and so solid that by now I do not think she even knew the wall was there. She stood at my grave and felt nothing in particular, and considered that a virtue. That was the thing about Crystal that kept me awake some nights. Hatred I could have mapped, cruelty I could have navigated, but a person who has simply learned not to look, that was something else entirely, something that would never apologize because it had never admitted, something that would receive everything stolen on your behalf and call it destiny. She took her place at the entrance, radiant, perfectly framed. Margaret crossed the hall to me. She looked down, and her voice came low and precise, the way a blade is precise. Basin at her feet, rose water, not plain, and when you remove her shoes, she crouched, bringing her face level with mine, close enough that I could smell the flint and rosewater scent of her, the calculation beneath the perfume, the cold mineral sharpness of a woman who had been running calculations since before I was born. You do it like she is made of glass, because today, to the right eyes, she is. She held my gaze for 1 extra second. Not long, just long enough to make certain I understood that she was not giving me instructions. She was showing me what she had made of me. She stood, she smoothed her dress, she walked away. I set the basin at Crystal's feet. I folded the cloth across my knees. I looked at my own hands, red from the scrubbing, smelling of wolfsbane and cedar bark and 6 years of swallowed fury. And I thought of the boot on my knuckles that morning, and the clean stone that didn't need scrubbing, and the smile Margaret had given the mirror, and my father, somewhere in this house, choosing not to hear any of it. Remember everything, I told myself. Every single thing. Outside, beyond the tree line, something moved. The distant sound reached me before anyone else in that hall registered it. Hooves on packed earth, wheels on the forest road, the low, authoritative approach of a procession that did not hurry because it had never needed to. He was here. I bowed my head. I pressed my knees into the cold stone floor of my father's house, and I waited for the door to open, for the light to change, for the moment Lady Margaret had spent months engineering to finally arrive. I did not know then that the trap she had built so carefully around me was about to catch something she had never once planned for. The door swung open, and the air in the hall changed. He did not announce himself. That was the first thing I noticed. The wolves who came through my father's house over the years, the pack officials, the visiting alphas, the elders who outranked Frederick by half a breath and wanted everyone to feel it, they all carried their authority like something they were afraid of losing, loud, forward, filling every room before their bodies arrived in it. King Don walked through the door of my father's house the way winter walks in. Quietly, completely, and with the absolute certainty that nothing in the room would remain unchanged by his presence. The pressure hit me first. Low, sub-audible, a frequency that had no name in human language, but that my wolf knew the way lungs know air. It moved through the stone floor, through my knees, up through my ribs, and wrapped itself around something deep and dormant inside me that had not stirred in years. I pressed it down. I focused on the basin. I focused on my hands. I focused on the small crescent scar on Crystal's left ankle, the one she got the summer she was 8 years old, when she fell from the boundary fence chasing a fox that had no business being in the yard. I was the one who found her. I was the one who carried her inside. Her weight against my chest, her screaming in my ear, her blood on my dress. I was the one who cleaned the wound and held her hand until she fell asleep. She has never once mentioned it. I heard him greet my father. And then I heard something I had not expected. Warmth. Real warmth. Not the performed variety that Margaret dispensed like currency. He said my father's name like it meant something to him. Like Frederick was a person he was genuinely glad to see, and not merely a courtesy stop on a king's itinerary. My father laughed, a sound so unfamiliar in this house that one of Margaret's ladies actually looked up from her post. I filed it. I did not react. Then the warmth shifted. I felt his attention move the way you feel a candle brought close in a dark room, not seen, but sensed. A change in the quality of the air, a new direction to the heat. He was looking at the floor. He was looking at me. I did not look up. I kept my eyes on the rosewater, on my hands, on Crystal's ankle scar. Above me, I heard King Don's voice stop. Not pause the way a man pauses to think. Stop. Mid-word. A fraction of a second, the length of a single missed heartbeat, and then continue as if nothing had interrupted it. Smooth, recovered, professional. But I heard it. And from the slight shift in my father's weight, the almost imperceptible straightening, the glance toward his king, Frederick heard it too. My father stood 3 feet to my left. He looked at the king's boots. He did not look at me. He will not remember this moment the way I will, I thought. My daughter, Lady Margaret said, moving like water into the gap before anyone could ask a question. Crystal, the pride of this household. King Don looked at Crystal. Lovely, he said. Polite, measured, the word of a man completing an assessment he had been asked to perform. My father said nothing about the girl on the floor. The king began to turn, to move deeper into the house, toward the sitting room where decisions would be made, where the version of this family that Lady Margaret had constructed would be accepted and made permanent. And then he stopped. Not fully, not dramatically, just a half-breath's hesitation, the way a man stops when he thinks he has heard his name spoken in another room and cannot be certain. His wolf made a sound, low, confused, not a warning and not a greeting, something in between, something reaching for a word it did not have, coming from the direction of the floor, the direction of me. Deep inside my chest, behind the ring, behind 6 years of cedar bark and wolfsbane and careful, practiced silence, something answered. It did not make a sound. It simply pressed, once, hard, like a fist against a locked door, not to break it, to make absolutely certain the door knew it was there. I stopped breathing. He walked on. The sitting room door closed, the hallway went quiet. I was still on my knees in my father's house with rose water on my hands and my wolf slamming against its cage and the cold absolute certainty settling over me like the first snow of winter. He had not seen me, but something in him already had. And Lady Margaret, standing 3 feet away with her perfect smile and her perfect plan, had no idea that the trap she had spent months constructing had just developed a crack she would never be able to find in time.
The messenger arrived on a Thursday. I know it was Thursday because I had just finished resalting the meat stores for the week, a Thursday task. Always Thursday, when I heard the horse in the yard and Margaret's sharp intake of breath from the sitting room. The sound she made when something arrived that she had been expecting but had trained herself not to visibly expect. I stayed in the larder. I pressed myself against the cold stone shelf and I listened. Selected. Royal candidate. The palace. The possibility of queen. The words came through the wall one at a time, each one landing like something dropped from a height. I heard Crystal shriek, pure and bright and entirely genuine, the sound of a girl who had been told her whole life that she was meant for something larger and had just received confirmation. I heard Margaret weeping, soft, controlled, perfectly timed, the performance of a woman overcome by joy she had always quietly known was coming. I heard my father say nothing. I walked out of the larder. I don't know why. Some part of me needed to see the room, needed to stand in it and let the reality of what was happening land fully, rather than arriving in pieces through a wall. They were clustered near the fire. Margaret, Crystal, the messenger, 2 household wolves clapping each other on the shoulder. Crystal was already holding the royal seal, turning it over in her hands like a stone she couldn't believe was real. Margaret's hand was pressed to her heart. My father stood slightly apart, cup raised, expression arranged into something that resembled celebration. And then he looked at me. It lasted less than 3 seconds. I counted them. In those 3 seconds, something happened to his face that I had not seen in 4 years. The arrangement dropped away, the careful, managed distance he had worn like a second skin since Margaret moved into this house. It fell, the way a mask falls when the string breaks, suddenly and completely. And underneath it was my father. My actual father. The one who used to lift me onto his shoulders at the winter market. The one who used to say, "There's my girl," like those 3 words were a complete sentence. The one who had existed before grief made him into someone who looked away. He looked at me, and I saw him see me, really see me. The kitchen dress, the red hands, the knuckles still marked from Crystal's boot that morning. The 3 seconds of a man who had been sleepwalking, suddenly feeling the ground beneath his feet. His mouth moved. No sound came out. And then Margaret's hand found his arm. Lightly. Just her fingers at the crook of his elbow. She didn't look at him. She was still smiling at Crystal. It was the most casual gesture in the room. His eyes went somewhere far away. His cup went to his lips. The mask resettled, smooth and seamless, like water closing over a stone. I did not look away from him. I let myself see all of it. The clearing and the closing, the man and the fog, the 3 seconds and the end of them. I had spent 4 years finding reasons for his silence. Grief, exhaustion, the weight of elder duties, the difficulty of navigating a new household. I had built him a careful architecture of excuses because the alternative, that he chose this, was a thing I could not live inside.
I took the architecture apart brick by brick. I set it on the floor. I let myself know what I knew. He saw what was being done to me. He had always seen it. He chose his cup anyway. And in that choice, I stopped being his daughter. I became something he would have to answer for. I did not say this out loud. I did not let it reach my face. I filed it in the place where I kept everything that would eventually matter, and I turned toward Lady Margaret, who had turned toward me with her smile still perfectly in place. "You'll go with Crystal," she said, "as her personal attendant." Crystal clapped her hands once, bright and thoughtless. "Oh, perfect! You already know exactly how I like things." My wolf moved, one involuntary pulse, a compass needle swinging hard towards something that lived in the direction of the palace, something I could not name and was not ready to name, something that had been pressing against a locked door since the moment a king stood in my father's hallway and lost a word mid-sentence. I pressed it down. Not yet. I went to pack. The gray dress, the 2 linen shifts, the small knife my mother left me, wrapped in oilcloth at the bottom of a box that Margaret had never thought to search, the ring on its cord around my neck, warm from my skin. The shawl last. Always the shawl last. 10 minutes. Everything I owned fit into one small canvas bag. I stood in the room above the kitchen for what I understood, without anyone telling me, was the last time. I looked at the walls, the low ceiling, the window facing the garden where my mother's grave sat beneath the oak tree whose roots had begun to trouble the foundation. I did not let myself cry, not because I wasn't allowed to, because I was saving it. Because there was a place and a moment that would deserve those tears far more than this room did, and I intended to be standing somewhere very different when they finally came. I picked up the bag. I walked out. I did not look back at the window or the garden or the oak tree. But as I crossed the yard toward the waiting cart, as the palace road opened ahead of me, wide and foreign and leading somewhere I had never been, I felt it again. That compass needle pull, that current moving through my wolf like a tide that had been building since before I had words for it. Somewhere at the end of that road, the most powerful alpha in the world was living inside walls he believed were completely secure. He did not know I was coming. And Lady Margaret, standing in the doorway of my father's house, watching me go with the satisfied expression of a woman watching a problem remove itself, she did not know it either. And somewhere beneath the stone of this house, under the oak tree, under the roots that had been growing slow and quiet and unstoppable for 20 years, I thought I felt my mother smile.
The palace did not care that I was in pain. That was the first thing I understood about it. My father's house had at least retained the shape of a home. The small cruelties had edges, corners, a logic built around people who had once loved each other before they forgot how. The palace had no such architecture. It was enormous and indifferent and ancient, its stones worn smooth by centuries of people who had passed through it and left no mark. It received me the way it had received all of them, without acknowledgement, without memory, without mercy. I was given a uniform the color of ash, a room near the wash quarters that smelled of lye and old timber, and a schedule written on folded parchment in handwriting so small it seemed designed to be forgotten. I read it once. I memorized it. I began. The rose water used in the upper chambers had been imported. I caught its scent when I passed the supply stores on my first morning. Something warmer than anything grown in this region's soil. Something that carried the ghost of a warmer climate in it. Even the luxury here was indifferent. Even the beauty was not meant for anyone in particular. From the moment I passed through the servants' gate, I was counting. Not obviously, never obviously, but in the way I had learned to count at home, the way water counts the cracks in stone, quietly and without ceasing. Doors, 43 on the servants' level, 9 of which were never fully latched. Guards, 16 on the day rotation, 11 at night. 1, a broad-shouldered wolf stationed at the East Corridor junction, whose nostrils flared at everything, whose head turned a half-second before the others when someone rounded a corner. I gave him a wide berth from the first morning, and came always from the downwind side when our routes intersected. On the third day, I found the East Archive. On the fourth, I identified which lady-in-waiting opened the king's correspondence before it reached him. She held the sealing wax to the light first, which meant she was not the original threat, but someone managing one. On the fifth day, I felt the territorial lines of the palace for the first time, running through the stone beneath my feet like veins beneath skin. Old, layered, the accumulated authority of every alpha who had ever held this ground. I filed all of it. I showed nothing. I kept moving.
Then Crystal called for her evening bath and her feet. The basin they brought was gold. The floor was white marble, veined with gray, cold even through the fabric of my uniform. I knelt. The posture was identical, the angle of my back, the position of my hands, the way I had to arrange my weight to stay still on a hard floor without showing the strain of it, all of it identical to the stone floor of my father's hallway. The only difference was the quality of the materials surrounding the humiliation. Crystal looked down at me. Her expression was relaxed, comfortable. She had settled into this arrangement with a speed that should have surprised me, and did not. "You're actually quite good at this," she said. Not unkindly. That was the thing that cracked something open in my chest. Not the words, not even the assessment, but the register. Conversational. Easy. The tone you used with something that served a function. She was not being cruel. She had simply stopped, completely, cleanly, without apparent effort, seeing me as someone cruelty could even be directed at. Hatred I could have gripped. Hatred has edges and temperature, and it means the other person still registers your existence. This was worse. This was erasure so complete it had become comfortable, and she would go to her grave never understanding why the girl who washed her feet had looked at her the way water looks at stone, patient and utterly committed to finding the weakness in it. I felt myself beginning to disappear, and I made a choice. I looked at the floor, not in defeat, deliberately. I let my wolf sight open for the first time since arriving, really open, the way you open a door you have been keeping closed, and I looked at what was actually there beneath the marble. The territorial lines came into focus like rivers seen from a great height, layered, ancient, running in patterns that told the entire history of this place to any wolf trained to read them. They moved across the marble in slow currents, crossing and converging, and I followed them with my eyes the way you follow a map toward its center. 2 floors above me, directly overhead, the lines converged. They pulled toward a single point the way all rivers pulled toward the sea, with the certainty of something that has always known where it was going and never once doubted the direction. His chambers. I folded the cloth. I stood. Crystal was already looking at her reflection, checking her earrings. She did not see me stand. She did not see what had changed in the few minutes I had been on her floor. She did not see me look once more at the ceiling, at the 2 floors of stone and ancient territorial claim between me and the room where the most powerful alpha in the world slept. I picked up the basin. I turned toward the door. And that was the moment I heard it. Faint, distant, from somewhere above me, on the other side of a ceiling that should have swallowed all sound. A wolf, pacing. 3 steps, stop. 3 steps, stop. The rhythm of something searching for something it could not find and did not yet have a name for. My hand tightened on the basin handle. He was restless, and I had just found his map.
2 weeks. 14 days of gray uniform and folded linen, and yes, my lady, and the particular silence you learn to wear when invisibility is the only armor you have. 14 days of moving through the palace like water through stone, present everywhere, registered nowhere. I learned things. The court official who handled the Eastern grain records visited the archive corridor every 3rd evening, always after the supper bell, always alone. He never carried documents in, he always carried a heavier satchel out. I noted the pattern on day 4 and said nothing to anyone. The lady-in-waiting assigned to the king's correspondence held each sealed letter up to the east window before delivering it, reading shadow shapes through expensive parchment with the practiced efficiency of someone who had never once been caught, because everyone who might catch her had already decided she was too loyal to suspect. The palace wolves tightened their formation around King Don during the 2nd council gathering. Not dramatically, just a half-step closer, a collective drawing in, the unconscious behavior of wolves who sensed a pressure their alpha had not yet named out loud. Whatever they were sensing, it was coming from inside the walls, not outside them. I filed everything. I kept moving. I watched King Don at the formal gathering on the 12th evening, the one where Crystal was presented again, this time in deep blue, her hair dressed with small silver pins that caught the firelight. He moved through the room with the fluency of a man who had been performing competence since before he could choose otherwise, greeting, assessing, deciding, all of it correct, all of it practiced. But his eyes kept moving, not obviously. Most people in that room would not have noticed, but I had spent 6 years watching a woman who never showed anything she didn't intend to show, and that training had made me sensitive to the gap between a person's face and their attention. His face was present. His attention was elsewhere, scanning, searching, moving across the room with the restless precision of a wolf that has scented something real in a field full of performance and cannot locate the source. It passed over Crystal twice, politely, assessingly, the way you look at something you have been told you should want and are waiting to feel the wanting for.
It was nothing like the way his wolf had looked at a stone floor in my father's hallway. I set down the wine I was carrying. I turned back toward the servants' corridor, and I walked straight into King Don. Not almost, straight into. He came around the corner from the opposite direction at the same moment I rounded it from mine, and there was simply no space between us, and the linen I was carrying went in 3 different directions, and his hand caught my arm before I hit the wall. The world stopped. His hand on my arm was warm through the fabric of my uniform. His grip was automatic, reflex, not intention, but it did not release. And then, before he had consciously decided anything, before his mind had caught up with his body, his grip tightened. Just for a moment, just 1 breath's worth of pressure, the involuntary response of a wolf that has finally, after 2 weeks of reaching and missing, made contact with the thing it has been searching for. He caught himself. His hand relaxed, but it did not let go. He looked at my face. I looked at a point past his left shoulder and kept my breathing even and my expression arranged into the appropriate blankness of a servant caught in an inconvenient moment. And I felt his attention land on me, the way you feel the sun come from behind a cloud. Not gentle, sudden, complete. "He have seen you before," he said. Not a question, the statement of a man comparing something in front of him to something that had been sitting unresolved at the back of his mind for a very long time. "You have seen a lot of people, Your Majesty," I said. I bent down, I collected the linen, I straightened, I walked away. I counted my steps. 1, 2, 3. I kept my spine straight and my pace unhurried, and my hands from shaking through an act of will so concentrated it felt like holding a door closed against a storm. Behind me, he inhaled. Slow, deliberate, the specific quality of breath that belongs to a wolf using its senses as instruments rather than instinct, tracking, reaching for something that kept dissolving before it could be classified. And then his voice, very low, not directed at me, but not directed at anyone else either. 3 words I almost could not hear and could not quite assemble before the distance swallowed them. I did not turn around. I walked until the corridor curved and he could no longer see me. Then I stood against the cold stone wall and pressed the linen against my chest and stayed very still until my wolf stopped slamming against the ring's seal. "Not here," I told it. "Not like this." That night, I stood in the corridor outside Crystal's chambers. The door was not fully closed. Through the gap, I could see the dressing table, the scattered silver pins from the evening, and the crown, plain gold, unadorned, sitting in its velvet mount with the absolute confidence of something that has been told it belongs somewhere and has never had cause to question it. My wolf pressed against the seal so hard my vision blurred at the edges. It knew where he was. It had always known. That compass needle pull, that current moving through my bones toward the upper floors. It wanted me to turn around, walk back down the corridor, find the staircase, let the ring do what the ring was preventing. "He already knows," it said in the wordless language of instinct. His grip tightened before he could stop it. "He just needs 1 breath of what you actually are, and everything Margaret built comes down tonight." I looked at the crown on Crystal's dressing table. I looked at it for a long time. Then I turned away from the door. I walked back to my small room. I sat on the edge of my narrow bed and put my hands flat on my knees and stayed very still while the palace settled into its night rhythms around me. Above me, the 3 steps, pause, 3 steps, of something pacing in the chambers 2 floors up. He was restless again. I thought about the 3 words in the corridor I still hadn't assembled. I thought about the East Archive and the letters read at windows. I thought about a crown sitting on a table that did not belong to the head it was being fitted for. I reached beneath my collar and wrapped my fingers around the ring. It pulsed once, warm, waiting. Soon, I told it. Above me, the pacing stopped. The silence was so total and so sudden that I sat up straighter without meaning to. The quality of it was different, not the silence of a wolf that is searching, but the silence of a wolf that has just found something. The ring burned warm against my palm, and somewhere 2 floors above me, King Don began to move. Not the restless pacing of before, but something with direction, something crossing his chambers toward his door with the focused deliberateness of a man who has just decided to go and find out what his wolf has been trying to tell him all night. I stopped breathing. He was coming.
The palace sounds different at night. Not quieter, different. The stones hold things that daylight swallows. The slow, steady heartbeat of a guard 2 corridors away, the territorial hum of the alpha lines running through the walls at a frequency that lives below hearing and above feeling. The wind pressing against the high windows, carrying pine resin and cold earth, and the distant, restless movement of wolves along the forest boundary markers in the dark. I heard all of it. I had always heard all of it. I was only now letting myself understand what it meant. I sat on the edge of my narrow bed and lifted the cord from around my neck. The ring sat in my palm, small, plain, silver, the kind of thing that does not announce itself because it has never needed to. My mother wore it every day of her life. The week before she died, she pressed it into my hand and closed my fingers around it and said, very quietly, "Keep this close. Keep it against your skin. You are not ready for what you carry yet." She paused. She looked at me the way she only looked at me when she thought I wasn't noticing. "But you will be." I was 9 years old. I thought it was grief talking. I was wrong. I turned the ring in my fingers and felt, for the first time deliberately, with my wolf close to the surface instead of sealed beneath it, the pulse. A heartbeat that was not mine. Something old and patient and absolutely certain. My wolf pressed upward against the seal, and for the first time I did not press it back down. I understood now. Not everything, but enough. The ring was not simply my mother's love made into silver. It was a lid, placed deliberately with full knowledge of what it was containing, over something Lady Margaret would have recognized and destroyed the moment she saw it clearly. My mother had known exactly what her daughter carried. She had looked at me, really looked, the way she looked when she thought I wasn't noticing, and she had understood, with the wisdom of a woman who had learned to survive powerful people, that the world was not yet safe enough for it. What Pam carried was not simply alpha blood. It was older than that. The winter line, the bloodline of the first mothers, the wolves who had walked this land before the current packs claimed it, before the king's lineage was the oldest thing anyone could name, had not died out the way history recorded. It had been hidden.
sealed into a plain silver ring, pressed into the hand of a 9-year-old girl and carried for 15 years inside a house that used her as furniture. The first mothers had not chosen mates. They had recognized them across distances, through suppressants, through years of silence, with a certainty that could not be manufactured or faked or denied. King Don's wolf had not been confused in my father's hallway. It had been certain, and it had been reaching toward that certainty every single day since.
Not yet, my mother had said. She was right. She had been right for 15 years. But I was inside the palace now. I had counted every guard. I had mapped every territorial line. I knew the East Archive and the letters read at windows and the formation of wolves around a king who was moving toward something he couldn't yet name. I knew the sound of his pacing. I knew the 3 words murmured in a corridor I still hadn't fully assembled. I knew that 6 minutes ago he had started moving with direction and then stopped, suddenly, completely, in a silence so total I had felt it through 2 floors of stone. Waiting. Not yet, my mother had said. Now, my wolf said. I put the ring on my finger, not on the cord, not against my skin like a secret to be kept. On my finger, properly, deliberately, the way you put something on when you are finished hiding it. The seal opened. It was not dramatic, no sound, no light, no visible change. Just a release, like a window opened in a room that has been closed for 15 years. My scent, my real scent, carrying the blood of the first mothers, the winter line that had walked this land before any current king drew breath, moved out from me in a slow, quiet, absolute tide. Through the door, into the corridor, up through the stones and the servants' passages and the layers of the palace that separated my small room from the chambers 2 floors above. 2 floors above, in his chambers, King Don's wolf went completely, perfectly still. And then it began to move. I looked at the ceiling. I spoke to my mother, and I spoke to you, the ones who have been with me since the beginning, since the stone floor and the rosewater basin and the boot that stopped less than a foot from my face. They dressed me as a servant and sent me into the palace. They thought they were punishing me. Lady Margaret has never understood the difference between a girl who is quiet because she is broken and a girl who is quiet because she is waiting. I have counted every guard in this palace. I have mapped every territorial line. I know who takes payments in the East Archive. I know who reads the king's letters before he does. I know that when the most powerful alpha in this world passes me in a corridor, the man who walked past me on my knees without a second glance, his grip tightens before he can stop it. He knows something is there. He just doesn't know what. He will. I carry the blood of the first mothers, the winter line, the bloodline that was old when this palace was new. Lady Margaret spent 4 years trying to erase a girl she didn't fully understand. She should have spent that time running. I am my mother's daughter. I was never the maid, and very soon, in this palace they sent me into to finish what they started at home, everyone is going to remember whose blood runs in my veins. Everyone is going to remember who Frederick's daughter is.
I closed my hand around the ring, and from 2 floors above me, immediate, certain, the sound of a man who has just received an answer to a question that has kept him awake for 2 weeks, I heard King Don's chamber door open. His footsteps moved into the corridor. They did not wander. They did not hesitate. They were coming in a straight line, directly toward the source of a scent that had been walking through his palace for 2 weeks in a gray servant's uniform, washing floors and folding linen and mapping every stone of the territory he thought was entirely his. My wolf went absolutely, perfectly still. Not in fear, in readiness. The footsteps did not stop. This is not a story about a girl waiting to be rescued by a king. This is a story about a girl who walked into the lion's den wearing the lion's own camouflage and used every stone of it to build herself a throne. Pam, Frederick's daughter, blood of the first mothers, shadow-born, ancient-lined, and very, very patient.